Welcome to episode 13 of the Autumn Brueckmann Show. Have you ever thought about what the mainstream media doesn't want you to know? We'll talk about that and more. Let's get started. For this segment of Crazy News, we'll be looking at some crazy headlines. Headlines that didn't quite match the reality of what was going on. And that is so true for the story of the assassination attempt of President Trump. So former President Trump was at a rally in Pennsylvania and gunfire was heard. President Trump had blood at the side of his head. And these iconic pictures were taken of him in this moment. And then these headlines are coming out trying to explain what's happening. And of course, we understand that it takes time to confirm people's identities, to confirm exactly the details of the story. And these major outlets don't want to just say whatever based on a hunch. They want to know what's really going on. But look at some of these headlines. You just can't believe the craziness that's going before you. And you just have to realize the truth that you can't trust the mainstream media. So are you trusting NBC, CNN, and ABC for your news? What would it take for you to recognize the mainstream media no longer cares about telling the truth? This goes beyond having bias. The minds behind these media corporations are actively working to manipulate your worldview. How do I know this? Well, just take a look at some of these crazy headlines that came out while the assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump was being covered. So I'm going to hop over here to this article. This is one of the craziest ones in my opinion. This is from CNN. And it says, Trump's speech interrupted by Secret Service. Now over here, I found this article that just has a compilation of a few of these headlines. So this is from the Dallas Express. The Dallas Express has this headline called, Left-Wing Media Sidesteps Headline Downplaying Assassination Attempt. So they just have a few pictures of these all compiled together. So another one from CNN, Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally. This is from the Washington Post. Trump escorted away after loud noises at Pennsylvania rally. From the Associated Press, Donald Trump has been escorted off the stage by Secret Service during a rally after loud noises ring out in the crowd. Dallas Morning News. Donald Trump whisked off stage in Pennsylvania after loud noises rang through the crowd. So what all of these are missing is the fact that there was gunfire, is the fact that the president is bleeding, right? These obvious factors that were already news that, right, they have photographs of this, and surely at this point they had reports that the noises sounded like gunfire, right? They could have definitely painted more to this picture. I think the worst one here is this Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally, right? If you didn't know what had happened, if I had read this first, not already having seen some of the other news outlets that were more accurate in reporting what was going on, you would not think that this was an assassination attempt. You wouldn't think that someone had just shot at former President Donald Trump, right? You would think maybe he had a heart attack or he tripped and the Secret Service overreacted or something like that, right? There's nothing in here that really shows you the reality of the situation. So it really makes you step back and think, what's going on? Why are these media outlets not just stating the facts, not just covering what's happening? Why is there such an effort to make sure they're nuancing everything and wording it in a certain way so that you don't think this was an assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump? And if we look at this holistically and we look at everything that's been going on in terms of how the media is portraying these issues with the right and the left and Republicans and Democrats, we can see that there's a certain picture that they want you to see of former President Donald Trump. So we're going to take a look at a few more news stories here that really make this clear. All right, so this is an article again from CNN. It says FBI and DHS warn of potential follow-on or retaliatory attacks following Trump assassination attempt. So again, they're like looking at this issue, looking at the fact that we had an assassination attempt, And they're trying to paint this picture that the violence is going to come from MAGA Republicans, right? This retaliatory sort of effect going on. And we see other articles that were to the same effect. So we have another article here from Reuters. After Trump's shooting, the presidential race will change dramatically and possibly violently. So it says in this paragraph, whereas Trump has regularly used violent language with his followers, advisors and allies of the former president flipped the script on his Democratic opponent, President Joe Biden, saying it was the demonization of the Republican presidential candidate that led to the assassination attempt. I saw a lot of these posts on X where people were making this connection. They would post various things from the past that Democrats had said that painted this picture of Trump as being, like Hitler, this threat that had to be stopped at all costs, those sorts of statements. So they're connecting this rhetoric and saying that this contributed to what happened with the assassination attempt. Now, what I want you to see in this article is just this first statement, whereas Trump has regularly used violent language. So Reuters is just immediately presenting Trump as a violent figure. So they're asserting that this presidential candidate is someone who regularly uses violent language. Now, this is their opinion. This is their take on it. I disagree. I would not say that this presidential candidate regularly uses violent language. It implies that he himself is inciting violence when they don't actually have any substantial evidence to make that claim. But I'm pointing this out to show you that this is the picture that they want to paint. They want you to view this presidential candidate as someone who is extreme, as someone who is violent. When I get another word here from another article. Our next article is from PBS. It's called, After the Assassination Attempt Against Trump, Anger and Anxiety Loom Over the Republican Convention. The first statement here says, Donald Trump's campaign chiefs designed the convention opening this week to feature a softer and more optimistic message, focusing on themes that would help a divisive leader expand his appeal among more moderate voters and people of color. Now, at first, that statement just looks like they're talking about the convention, talking about the topics, but if you look in there, it says that would help a divisive leader. So that word divisive, again, they're trying to paint this picture that this presidential candidate is divisive, right? He uses violent language. He's a divisive leader. They're stating these things as though they are facts. And this type of rhetoric is just embedded in all that they're writing, right? They're not just presenting information about what's happening, what's being said, who's there, what their topics are. They're using this language to try to shift people's perspective about what this candidate is like. They're not giving you information and letting you decide what you think. They're just telling you, this is how it is. This is what you're supposed to think about it. So I think this was just so obvious in the way they painted this in light of the assassination attempt that it's really difficult to ignore. It's hard to see the headlines that we see and contrast that with what was really happening and have any kind of trust in the mainstream media. So just one more piece that I want to talk about with this. And this is a post from X. This is from Wade Miller. He says, "Take note left. There are no riots today. MAGA isn't burning down Butler, Pennsylvania. Interviews with those at Trump rally didn't express hatred or retribution. They appealed to heaven and prayer for our country." And I think it's important for us to take note of this because this is a contrast again to the mainstream media. Right? I showed you one headline that's talking about retaliatory violence. Right? That was a common thread that kept coming up as they were covering the assassination attempt. It was just like the greatest concern, the greatest worry, the greatest fear we have is retaliatory violence. But then you would see, right, if you were looking for it, you'd see footage of people who were actually at the rally, and there was nothing of any sort to indicate that. Right? They were very calm. They didn't do anything that would indicate that somebody was plotting some kind of retaliation. And of course, I'm sure you could find some extreme post on the internet. There's people on both sides that post such things, but there weren't people doing this. But the news is going to portray it that way anyway. They aren't looking for the truth or the reality to show you what's really happening. They're just painting the picture that way because they want you to believe that that's how it is. And so we're actually going to take a look in our next segment to see how do we respond to this. So we have a new segment that's called So Now What? So our new segment called So Now What is basically a time for us to say, how do we respond, right? It's easy to look at the news and different things going on, and we can learn from it. We can see how bad things are, and we can complain about it all we want, but how are we going to respond to this? So in our last segment, we just talked about the mainstream media, how we can't trust them, how they kind of push their own worldview, and how do we respond to what's going on? So when we're looking at the news, we're really looking at, right, how do I get good news? How do we get news that's accurate? Our goal is not unity. Our goal is not balance. Our goal is truth and civility, right? We want people who are presenting the reality of what's going on and presenting it in a good and honest way. So a lot of people say, well, I want balanced news, or I want something, in the middle, right? My goal is not to be in the middle. I want to be truth. I want to be correct. Sometimes one side is correct and one side is wrong. And I don't want to just be in the middle because it's nicer. If the middle is wrong, then I want to be wherever the truth is. So your goal isn't to look for someone that's the most balanced or has the most of one side and the other side. The goal is someone who's actually presenting reality. So for me personally, right, my kind of journey into this, I remember reading news during the 2020 Republican National Convention, and my goal was to compare, what I saw with what people were talking about. So I watched the Republican National Convention for myself, and then I was looking to see, what kind of things people are saying about it. I was shocked to realize that the mainstream news were not even attempting to report on what was happening. So at this point, I knew that there was bias. I knew there was kind of some leanings of the mainstream media, and they weren't maybe presenting things according to my own perspective or my own worldview. But I had to think, what would I expect a news organization to report? So at this, I was expecting the topics discussed, the names of the speakers. Right? I expected them, of course, to throw in some opinions about who did a good job, spoke clearly or poorly, if they liked the topic, if it was well received, that sort of information. I anticipated some bias, but what I found was zero information, right? There wasn't even information about what topics were talked about. There wasn't even information about the names of the speakers. The headlines that I was reading were just saturated with their own worldview and opinions about it, but they didn't really have any substance behind those opinions to prove them. I remember one person said that the only good thing at the Republican National Convention was the national anthem rendition, which is like, that's fine if that's your opinion that you didn't like any of it, but what happened? Why don't you talk about what was actually going on there? I loved that particular Republican National Convention. It was very patriotic. There was a lot of moments where they're talking about, people's faith and just this connection between the life that they're living, God's call on their life and what they're doing, and how this is helping their country, helping people that live here. There was a lot of beautiful moments that I loved watching, and so it was disheartening for me to see how poorly it was presented. If someone was just looking at the mainstream media, they would have no idea what had happened or what was going on. So that was my first kind of take of realizing this really is a bigger issue than just bias. So in that moment, I stopped checking mainstream media. I will still read articles from mainstream media. Like, I show you guys articles from them all the time. They're still saying things that are happening in the world, but you have to understand that they are presenting it according to their own worldview that may be different than yours, and they don't care. They're not trying to just present facts and information. They are trying to present their worldview. It doesn't automatically make every article bad, but it makes you have to do a little bit more work into finding the truth and finding out what's actually going on. You recognize that they're not just reporting the news, they are developing worldviews. I do think it's good to check multiple news sources, but if your multiple news sources are CNN, ABC, and MSNBC, you are not getting a variety of viewpoints. You are being given only information that will lead you to share in their worldview. So for me personally, I use a combination of conservative news sources, and I also look at X. So I like conservative news sources because I know what worldview they're coming from. I've already determined on my own that I share in this worldview, and I can recognize their own opinions. I like news sources like the Daily Wire or the Blaze, I value the work that they do. Just as an example, Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? I believe that had value. I believe it helped people to recognize what was going on with these issues of transgenderism. So that's work that I think is worth following and looking into. And they're actually doing work to try to change legislation and change the laws to influence people's lives for the better. And so again, that's work that I value. Those are value systems that I believe in, and I am on board with what they're doing. And they're open about it. They're not pretending that they're in the middle and that they're not biased. Like, anyone who goes to their source knows where they stand on the issues and knows what they're getting into. And I don't necessarily watch every show, but I'll go there and read articles to find information. So there's several conservative news sources like that. When we were watching the coverage of the assassination attempt, we were actually watching Charlie Kirk, and I think he did a really good job of presenting the information in just as quickly as he could. He would correct himself if something came out later that wasn't accurate, but he was really trying to be on top of presenting things accurately. We were also watching this on X. I was on, going through different posts, and it was an amazing contrast to see what was happening on X versus what was happening on the mainstream media, and seeing how much faster and how much more accurate things were on X. I mean, you were getting videos coming out of people who were at the event, who were being asked questions, who were talking about their experiences faster than the headlines were even accurately reporting what was happening in the mainstream news. So it was very interesting to see that contrast. Now, if you had told me 1 or 2 years ago that a social media platform would be a good news source, I would probably have internally rolled my eyes at you. However, in the aftermath of the assassination attempt on President Trump, right, just everything that I've been describing about that, it's really clear that X is actually a really good place to get information. That if you follow people who have shared values, or people who are in positions of leadership, or people who are, savvy with the news, you can find good people to follow who are going to post articles about the sorts of news that you are interested in, and you can kind of develop and understand what your sources are and how accurate they are. It does take some time, right? If you're kind of breaking away from your checking CNN and ABC and those kinds of things, it'll take you some time before you can find the sources that you personally are interested in and that you trust. But it's worth it to take the time to really think about, are they presenting the actual information, or are they just trying to convince me of their worldview? So let's just dive into kind of 2 different aspects of getting to the news. So first, you have your news sources, where you kind of just go to that website or go to that person's site and see what they have to say. So this would be following people like Charlie Kirk at Turning Point USA, the Daily Wire, the Blaze. You already know their position. You know they're coming from a conservative perspective. They're not pretending that they have no bias or opinion in their news. What I enjoy about these sources is that they're generally very substantial. Their reporting is full of relevant information, and you can often go to other places to seek out further information if you'd like to. I believe there's wisdom in listening to other viewpoints. We don't want to live in an echo chamber, but there's nothing wrong with looking at a news source from people who share your values. And just one quick thing, just a quick aside to show why that's maybe a good thing. If we look at an issue such as transgenderism, so when we're looking at a conservative news source that would say, a man cannot become a woman cannot become a man. When you're reading a news article about an issue like that, they're actually able to tell you, right, this was a man who claimed to be a woman, or, they might word it in a different way, but you actually understand, what happened, versus some of these other news sources, they'll just tell you that a woman did this or a man did this, but it's actually not. It's somebody of the opposite gender claiming to be that. So when you're looking for a news source that aligns with your values, right, you can kind of understand where they're coming from. So there is some value to looking at those places. But like we said, we don't want you to just be in an echo chamber only listening to people that you already like. So how do you find other people that you can get valuable insight from, even though you might not agree with them on everything, or you might not share their perspective? So here's a few things that I consider when I'm looking for people to follow, people that I want to hear what they have to say, hear from their perspective. So I look at, what is their position of influence? What are their values? Where do they obtain their information? So I'm going to give you one specific example. So this is somebody that that I follow on X. So he doesn't share all of my values. He doesn't agree with me on everything, but I can still listen to what he has to say, and I can still value, where we do agree, and I could still value even where we disagree because I understand where they're coming from. So some values that you personally might want to consider, values like freedom of religion, truth, distinctions between genders, the Constitution, personal liberties, life. There's different things that they might have valuable insights that you can listen to and you can gain from their perspective. So we could go on. You can think for yourselves, what kind of things you're interested in finding out about. But you don't want to only listen to people who agree with you 100%, because then you won't really be learning anything new. So my example is Robert Kennedy Jr. on X. So I follow him, and here's some reasons why I do. First, he's in an important position. He is a candidate for president. He is an influential person in American politics at this time. So just for that reason alone, it's valuable to hear what he has to say. Even if I didn't agree with anything that he had to say, just because of his position, it's worthwhile to follow and listen and see what's going on and what's happening in the world. So one specific issue that I can tell you that he speaks about that I value is vaccines. So aside from his position running for president, Robert Kennedy Jr. founded Children's Health Defense, and some of their work focuses on vaccines. I have personally gone to his website and looked up information on different vaccines, and you can go there and they have a database, and it's really interesting. And that is, my third point, that he has research behind what he's talking about, right? He has done the work, right? He's built this organization. They have this database, right? He's not just pulling opinions out of the air. It's very interesting and very useful, the information that he has. So it's worthwhile to listen to. So this isn't somebody that I agree with 100%. This isn't somebody who has positions that I would say, I just listen to what he has to say, and that's like what I would have to say. Not at all. There's a lot of areas where we disagree. I'm much more conservative than he is. But I don't want to only listen to people that agree with me. I want to know what's happening in the world. I want to know what people are thinking about, what people value, what they're talking about. And so I want to listen to other people. So he's a person of influence. He shares some of my values, and he has researched a lot of information, and he knows what he's talking about. So the fact that I consider myself more conservative than he does shouldn't prevent me from listening to what he has to say. So I hope this helps you a little bit, just some insight into how I gain some news and I gain some perspective. It's totally fine to be looking at news sources that do agree with your values. It's good to have people that are on the same page with you, that you understand their worldview, but you don't want to only look at those sources. Who are people that have insight that you can gain from, that talk about things that you're interested in, that have done their research, that know the information, that maybe you don't agree on everything, but you can still learn from what they have to say. So I encourage you to take some time and think about that. Think about people who are sharing valuable, truthful content that you can look at. It might be difficult to judge at first, but over time you'll be able to compare different people and what they have to say, compare events with what you observe and with what you see in the world, and you'll be able to tell who's really telling the truth and who wants to suppress the truth. Up next, we're going to talk about 2034 in the news, and we're actually going to take a look at how we can use this method to find some great information. For today's segment of 2034 in the news, we're looking at this issue of parent rights and transgenderism. So we see this happen in terms of custody battles. This is the way this played out in 2034. But we're going to look at the state of California and some of their laws. So I was on X and I follow Elon Musk. So he posted something about this going on in California, this law that came out. Right, it says the governor of California just signed a bill causing massive destruction of parental rights and putting children at risk for permanent damage. So he was reposting what someone else posted, which, by the way, this is also a useful way of finding new people to follow, right? The people that you are currently following will repost someone else's information that they saw. And sometimes you can get good information and kind of find interesting sources that way. You can just follow someone for a while and decide, right, if that's someone you're getting valuable, truthful information from. So I read this a little bit, saw that there was a new law out. So I looked it up and I found this article. So this is from ABC. So again, right, this is a mainstream media news article, but I could still read it. I just understand that there might be some of their perspective stuck in here. It says California is first state to ban school rules requiring parents get notified of child's pronoun change. So this has been an issue in schools. So I've seen plenty of stories from various states of parents having this issue where their child may be a different gender at school than they are at home. And the school's not notifying the parents of this. They're lying and covering it up and hiding this information from parents. So they're painting this picture at school that they have to do this to protect the child from the parents who might be upset. They don't take into any consideration that the perspective of the parent that's lived with this child their whole life might be valuable into determining the best course of action for the child. Right, but in any case, California's taken this a step further, not just saying, schools don't have to tell parents, but they're preventing schools from making a rule. So, right, if a principal is trying to decide like, hey, at our school, we're going to be honest with parents, like you can't make that a rule. You can't require parents to be notified of the child's pronoun change. Now, I took this a little bit further with my research because I had heard of other stories in California aside from this school issue of children actually being removed from the home. So I found this article from the Associated Press. It says, critics twist California bill that would weigh gender identity support in custody cases. So this is one where my knowledge, knowing that the Associated Press has a different worldview than I do on this, is really important because of the way that they're going to paint this information. Right, so it says Democratic California lawmakers have approved a bill that would instruct courts to consider, among many other factors, whether a parent affirms a child's gender identity when making custody and visitation decisions. Right, so what is this saying? That if you're in a custody case, so you're deciding where the child's going to live. And this could be a custody case, right? This could be between parents who are getting a divorce. This could be in terms of foster care, right? Is the child able to live in this home? So one of the factors that is now able to be considered is whether or not a parent's affirming their child's gender identity. So this article is basically saying that some people claim, right, they right here claim a California bill would require parents to affirm the gender transition of any child, including surgery, or else lose custody. So they go on to say that it's not really about surgery. So they're working really hard to paint this picture that this bill isn't so bad and isn't so extreme. So I just, right here, what I liked about this article, even though I don't like their bias, is that they include the actual bill. So you can read the bill for yourself. So this is AB 957, Family Law Gender Identity. So it says here right at the beginning of the bill, existing law governs the determination of child custody and visitation in contested proceedings and requires the court, for purposes of deciding custody, to determine the best interests of the child based on certain factors, including, among other things, the health, safety, and welfare of the child. So just saying information like this, we already know this. When we're doing a custody case, these are the things that we have to consider, the health, safety, and welfare of the child, among other factors. This bill, for purposes of this provision, would include a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression as part of the health, safety, and welfare of the child. So what they're saying is for you to be considered a caregiver that is fully caring for the health, safety, and welfare of the child, you must affirm the child's gender identity. Now, it doesn't say that they're automatically going to be removed. I don't think anybody is claiming that it's going to be an automatic removal, right? But when you're in court and they're determining whether or not your child can live with you, right, the fact that that court considers it a knock against you, that you won't transition them, right, that's huge, right? That weighs really heavily on parents, right? Obviously, parents don't want to be afraid that their children will be removed from their home and sent to live potentially with complete strangers, right? That's a really heavy statement to make in this bill. So they're considering as part of which home they should go to this issue of gender identity, right? And that also includes, right, divorce cases, right? So should the child be living with mom or dad? Who should be the primary caretaker? Who do they get more time with? Well, if you have two parents that disagree, right, one wants to affirm a new gender identity and one does not believe it's in the child's best interest to do this, it's basically saying that this state is going to say the child that's affirming the child's gender identity is the one that's in right health, safety, and welfare of the child. They're taking care of the child, not the other parent, right? That's really heavy. That's a big decision, right? People don't want to be living in this kind of fear. So one thing, I think this is kind of the positive end of this story. If we go back to X, so this isn't someone that I follow. It's Raw S Alerts, I guess. But they said Elon Musk has just announced that due to Governor Gavin Newsom signing AB 1955, which bans schools from making rules requiring parental notification if a child identifies as transgender, among other laws, SpaceX will move its headquarters from California to Starbase near Brownsville, Texas. And I think that's really awesome. I think that's an awesome response. I think for someone like Elon Musk, who has, right, a significant number of employees, like, it's really good that he's considering this. Because, right, if people are considering where they're going to move for work and they're moving to a state that might put pressure on them to raise their children in a way that they don't believe is honest or truthful, or that they're going to be afraid that the state's going to try to take their child away from them, remove custody of their child, right? That's scary, right? Parents don't want to be facing those types of issues, right? Parents want to be able to raise their children according to the truth, according to the values that they have, and not be told, right, by the government what they have to do, or be coerced, sort of like twisting their arm into making them bow down to this gender ideology out of fear that they're going to, just rip their child away from them. So I think it's great that Elon Musk is saying that, this is a big deal, and that he's considering his employees and their families and how they want to raise their kids, and he's actually making this move. So that's a great response. I hope that more people will take this seriously, will realize what a big deal it is that they're making this type of legislation, and that they'll, respond appropriately. I think it is appropriate to move away for this type of situation. I'm not saying everybody has to. I know everyone has different situations in their lives according to what you can do or not do. But I think it's important that we take this seriously and not just brush it off or think it's not a big deal. Like, this is going to impact people's lives. This is going to impact, how children are raised and how they grow up. And I hope that the people in California will respond, and hopefully in the future this can be changed. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Autumn Brueckmann Show. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you think of the mainstream media? Where do you go to get the most accurate, up-to-date news? Post it in the comments so we can see your thoughts. And remember to live in truth.